Culture and context have a huge influence on our communication, regardless of if you're a native speaker or someone new to the language. My name is Matt Abrahams, and I teach strategic communication at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Welcome to Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. Today, I really look forward to speaking with Lindsay McMahon. Lindsay is a friend and mentor. Her All Ears English podcast is wildly successful and incredibly helpful to anyone wishing to improve their English, again, as a non-native speaker or someone who is well-versed in English. Some of you might remember Lindsay and I collaborated on an episode, number 147, where we each interviewed Whitney Johnson as we discussed the power of personal disruption. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you for having me on, Matt. I appreciate it.
You have been laser focused for years on helping people around the world communicate better in English. You have your podcast, you offer courses, and even more. Can you share what you see as some of the biggest challenges for those who are newer to English?
You know, what we do at All Ears English, we focus on helping English language learners around the world, especially those who are interested in business English and the global, having a global career. We end up interacting with a lot of students of English who are at the intermediate to advanced level. And I think their challenge is unique. And what they end up doing is it ends up being a confidence issue a lot of times and a lack of the opportunities to practice. You feel that you need to practice to gain confidence, but you don't have confidence because you are not practicing. So it's a bit of a catch-22. And honestly, I would say that is the biggest thing. And that's why what we do on our show and just broadly, I think is a really good idea is to shift the focus to something a little bit deeper rather than just ourselves and our confidence levels.
How do you actually help people do that? Because that loop also is very similar to the loop I deal with a lot when I work with my students and the people I coach around anxiety and speaking. We're nervous about speaking in front of others. And one of the best ways to feel more confident is to actually speak in front of others, but that anxiety prevents you from doing it. So you're in this loop.
Right.
So what are some things that you encourage people to do or have seen help people in those circumstances?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to a broad philosophy. And this comes into our kind of the next piece that I think we're going to talk about here, which is finding a value, what you really stand for when it comes to communication. What is communication to you? And for us in All Ears English, as the co-host of the show, as the founder of the show, we believe it's about connection. It's about human connection. It's more important than our own self-esteem, our own self-confidence, how our voice sounds. What really matters is, are we connecting to, number one, is it our audience if we're giving a presentation? Is it the human being in front of us who maybe needs help, needs advice? Kind of seeing past, I don't feel confident, I feel nervous, and thinking, I'm here to connect. That is what I've seen as the way to get past that problem.
And you have a lovely saying, connection over perfection. And I have borrowed that and find such value in it. Many people in their communication, be they native speakers or non-native speakers to the language they are currently speaking in, want to get it right, as if there is some amazingly right way to say it. And I think you and I both agree that there is no right way. And that pressure we put on ourselves to do it right really gets in the way.
I think it comes back to education. Growing up, we're in school, we're memorizing facts for a test, right? We're taught to think that way in terms of learning anything new. And that presents a problem because I think that learning a language and learning communication broadly is so different from memorizing historical facts or even learning math equations.
You know, you have covered a lot of topics on your show and in the work you do. Across all of those topics that you've covered, can you highlight for us one or two of the biggest, perhaps most important communication lessons you've uncovered that help people who are learning a new language and learning how to effectively communicate?
So recently, this past week, we are building our professional English course, Professional English, where I interview professionals, CEOs, and people who are in positions, middle management to upper management in different companies, project managers, product managers, and I asked them about interviews specifically. And almost all of them, I interviewed 7 or 8 people. It was incredible. Almost all of them, the first response in terms of their tips for a successful interview was, know the company, research the company, understand where you're walking into, what's the conversation, what is on their mind as a company. And I think the same thing applies to communication. So it's this idea, it's not a novel idea, but it's true. It's the reason we keep hearing it is know your audience, know who you're talking to, and being willing to tailor what you're saying to who you're talking to.
Yes, absolutely. And across all of our podcast episodes and all the work I do, understanding your audience is by far the most prevalent bit of advice. You
Yeah.
help people speak in a different language, in this case, English.
Yes.
Do you help people listen as well?
We've done 2,300 episodes on All Ears English at this point, so we've covered a
We're coming
lot
up
of
on
topics, Matt.
200. I am in awe of what you've done, but yes.
We have done episodes on verbally express, showing that you're listening verbally. It is incredibly important to listen, but it's also important to show that you're listening, right? Because that's the cue. That's the signal that I'm here for you. I want to hear what you have to say. So we've done episodes on how do we show that and what are the utterances, what are the expressions that would support the speaker.
Give us some examples of what you've learned. I can imagine saying, and nodding your head.
Yeah.
What else? What else do we do?
Yeah, I really like expressions like what I'm hearing you say is, something like that. A few more words in there, a little more expressive, right? What I'm hearing you say is, what I'm hearing is, saying something like I understand, I hear you, right? It's a little more casual. There are a lot of ways to do it, but it really is important to say something versus nothing.
That's right. And those are the examples you gave are good ones, and they precede typically some kind of paraphrase or acknowledgement of what is said. So it's not enough just to say, "Oh, I hear you." It's I really hear you when you say this was difficult. So you name the thing that somebody has said.
Yes, exactly. Especially if they're conveying some kind of emotion, and maybe they're feeling vulnerable in that moment. That really matters that you take it in, that you reflect back what you've heard.
That's right. That's right. And another way to demonstrate what you've heard, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, is to ask a question that clearly takes into account what the person said. Is that a valuable skill as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're giving me lots of new episode ideas here, Matt.
Oh, well, there we go. There we go. I'd like to ask a little bit about idioms and nuance, and I want to share a story with you and have you perhaps augment this. So many years ago, I taught at a community college. We had many non-native speakers as students who I just adored teaching. And I remember very distinctly, unfortunately, having to burst a student's bubble. Give some bad news. He bounced into class, just big smile on his face. And I said, "Oh, you seem very happy. What's going on?" And he said, the young lady that I like just told me she wants to just be friends. And I'm so elated because he had done his research. He'd looked, just be friends. That's exactly what he was hoping for. He was hoping for perhaps a little more intimacy as well. And I had to share with him that at least here in this context, that let's just be friends is actually a very polite way of saying, from a romantic point of view, this is not going to advance any farther. And I felt it was important for me to share with him, turn it into a lesson, because I did not want him to embarrass himself or to do things that were predicated on what he thought it meant. We have lots of things like that in our culture. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you help people understand idioms?
The role that culture plays in language is super important. I actually got my master's in intercultural relations, so I've thought about this a lot. The importance of being aware of our own cultural assumptions. It is huge. There's so much that's going on in our assumptions that we just learned growing up. We didn't necessarily... it's not shared necessarily around the world, the same cultural ideas or values or assumptions. And so, idioms are important to teach in context. And that's why we use role plays when we teach those.
I want to share two other circumstances that I think I'd love your insight and opinion on. So it's not just the phrases that might have hidden meaning, but it's how we say the phrases and the context in which we say the phrases. So, for example, if I'm in a doctor's office and the doctor asks me, "How are you doing?" That's about my general health and well-being. If I am at a party or a restaurant or bar and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, how you doing?" it means something very different. They might be interested in my biology, but for a very different reason. My point is context influences meaning in communication as well. Tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that and what your thoughts are on that.
So that is really important, and so when we on the show, what we try to do is set up the vibe of the episode and the context right
Mhm.
from the start by,
Mhm.
asking each other just a question, maybe,
Mhm.
that's related to the topic. So it gets our listeners into that mode of, oh, this is the kind of scenario we're talking about today. We have to learn it situationally, and then we
Mhm.
have to practice it situationally. It's good to think about it and learn the theory, but what really matters is getting out there and actually practicing it.
Yeah, I really like this idea of one thinking about the context and situation and how that might influence the
Yeah.
words used and what the meaning is, and then really practicing and thinking about it situationally. One
Yeah.
more area of nuance I'll bring is we do a lot in English through analogies. We use lots of analogies. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the big problems is these analogies don't always translate to people's lived
Yes.
experience. That what
Right.
I always share with my students is here in the US, we use a tremendous number of sports analogies. Hit it
Yes.
out of the park, push it across
Mm-hmm.
the goal line. It's a slam dunk, which is
Yes.
wonderful if you know those sports. But if you don't, you're left behind and you're actually alienating some of your audience. And I'll share a
Yes.
quick story, Lindsay. I had a student once in the middle of his presentation. He used the analogy to the game of cricket, which in the United States is not played very much at all.
Yes.
Although I think that's changing. And nobody knew what the heck he was saying. And he stopped to his credit and looked at all of us and said, "That's how I feel when you use American football analogies."
Oh,
What a
interesting.
powerful moment that was for all of us. Do you talk about analogies and comparisons and how we have to be careful about those things?
Sure, for sure. I mean, this comes down to the culture we grew up
Mm.
in. It's really funny, the example of, if you think about, the values and the assumptions that you learned as a kid, this idea of independence in American culture.
Mhm.
Baseball is huge, but also independence is big, right? Our
Yeah.
mother said to us, "Oh, you tied your shoes all by yourself." If you think about that phrase, it strikes me that that's the message that we got from our parents when we were young, and that told us, even as like a, I don't know, 4-year-old, hey, it's good if you can do this on your own. So that inevitably translates to the words we choose as professionals, as adults, right? And so I think it's super important to understand that and maybe be a little bit flexible. Again, it comes back to who's your audience. Who are you talking with? What are they familiar with? And I mean, we certainly teach the baseball idioms as well, right? Because
Yes. So
learning
yeah.
them, recognizing them, maybe using one if you're feeling bold does make sense too. We need a little bit of both: the awareness, self awareness, and also just learning for the target culture we're going to be working in.
Yeah, because if you don't know some of those idioms, something might
Yeah.
seem like a curveball and you wouldn't
Yes.
understand what's going on. See what I did there?
Yes.
So, taking a step back, based on what we've talked about so far, but when you
Mm-hmm.
start a new job or you get promoted to a new role, in
Yes.
many ways, you are in a similar position. You have to understand the language, the jargon that's used. You have to understand the culture and the context. So this isn't just about a speaker of a new language. This is
Yes.
about any time you're in a situation where you're new to a particular context and culture, internal to a company, internal to an industry. These things
Mm-hmm.
also apply. Would you agree there?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think a good mode, a good strategy in those moments, whether you're new in a department or you've been promoted or whether you're learning a language, is in the beginning, spend more time listening. Certainly
Mhm.
for language learning, listening, having what we call in our world comprehensible input, right? From a
Mm.
language, applied linguistics, you need that input coming in. And even if it's just you have the fluency skills, but you're talking about vocabulary, which also applies for someone who's a native speaker of English, maybe there's special vocabulary for your workplace or your department or your position now. We need to take it in. So speaking a little bit less to be prepared, because we know that we live in a culture, at least an American business culture, that praises articulation, speaking, verbal expression, right? But in the beginning, we want to listen a bit more.
And I'll add to what you just said, because of that expectation and pressure that people will be contributing to the conversation. If
Yeah.
you are newer to a role or newer to the language, an easy way to make a contribution that's based on your listening is just to summarize or paraphrase what you've said or
I
what
love
has
that.
been said. So you don't actually have to add something new, which can be very risky and nerve wracking. You can just say, what I'm really hearing us talk about is this, and that could be
Yes.
incredibly valuable, especially in a meeting where there's a lot of discussion and tangential points coming in. So your listening not just helps you, but it can also,
Yes.
by sharing what you've heard with the group, be an incredibly important contribution that is much lower stakes, I believe, than having to
Yes.
add something new.
I love that idea. That is so important to be able to do. And you're right, it is lower stakes. It's not always about throwing in your idea in that meeting, right? Maybe there are enough ideas, right? But it's distilling down what's been said. I love it.
Yes, absolutely. I want to talk about specific best practices you have found help people to actually hone and develop these communication skills we've talked about. You've talked about role plays. I
Hmm.
get that. Talk about doing drills and increasing vocabulary. What are some other things when my students have a presentation, be they native speakers or not? I'll say, go to an AI tool. I don't care which one. Say, giving
Hmm.
a presentation on this topic, generate 3 questions for me that I might get so that the
Yeah.
students can actually get some practice. And again, it's not about memorizing the answers. It's just
Right.
about getting an idea of here's what a question might sound like. How can I think about answering? Do you have other
Hmm.
advice and guidance for how we can actually hone and develop these skills?
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea using AI in a modern way. You know, the tools that we already have at our hands. I would say taking that to the next level and trying to interact with someone in person, asking those same questions, having that same conversation with, if you do have someone around,
Mhm.
this is what I'm going to be talking about. What would you ask me? So, interacting with a native speaker of English as much as you can. Before the pandemic, we had a program called Urban Immersion Adventures where
Ooh.
we had our students come to New York and Boston, and we put together a weekend of immersion in English using the city. We had native speakers come on board as part of the team, but we also used the city. So we sent them on scavenger hunts around the city to collect certain pieces of information and then come back and
Mm.
present it. For example, we'd prepare them. What are we going to find on this scavenger hunt? Okay, how much time do we have? Now we're going out in the city. We're asking native speakers of English from the residents of the city for this information. We're coming back. So we're getting the tool of asking, and then we're coming back and we're using the skill of reported speech, coming back and reporting what we've learned. And then maybe we're debating something with our partner in the class. So for our listeners, if they can kind of use information in a multitude of ways rather than just do one task and you're moving on, that's a really cool way to gain fluency.
I like that, and
Yeah.
I love this idea of urban immersion. But
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how could that translate to a student in a class or a worker in a workplace. And I think you can do that.
Yeah.
You can explore certain things. Go check out a part of the campus you've never been to. Go
Yep.
eat your lunch at a different cafe if you're at work, and then think about how would you share that experience. How would you
Yes.
answer questions about it? I love that.
Yeah.
I had the good
Maybe interview the
yeah,
barista, things
yeah.
like that. Think about from one context, one situation, what are the many different angles you can take on that situation to use
Mhm.
different ways of communicating?
And I'm going to add to that. I had the good fortune to interview a United Nations interpreter, and his job is to
Nice.
translate across languages. And
Yeah.
one of the things he told me that he does to help just keep him agile and up for it is he'll try to think of some idea or concept and then challenge himself to come up with 5 or 10 different ways of
Hmm.
saying the same thing in different
Yes.
languages or in different ways. So it's not just explaining it one way. And it's much like the way an athlete would train for different
Yes.
situations. You don't just practice doing it one way always. You have to practice different ways. So I really
100%.
like that idea of challenging yourself to see it from all different angles, from turning it from
Yeah.
information to discussion to questioning. And that's
Yes.
really how you, I'll use an idiom. That's really how you kick the tires on your ability to do it.
It's kind of similar to the analogy of they say when you work out, you shouldn't just do the same workout. You shouldn't just
Right.
run on the treadmill for half an hour a day. You should try
Right.
different things, dancing, skiing, right?
Right.
Different cross training. You should be using different muscles, and this is what we need to truly reach that level of fluency that we want.
Lindsay, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to share the insights about learning a different language, but also broadening that to just any time we're in a new culture or context, be it.
Yeah.
Before we end, I always like to ask 3 questions of my guest. One I create
Okay.
specifically for you, and 2 that are similar across everybody. Are you ready for that?
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
So you have over 2,300 podcast episodes. What, across all those episodes, can you highlight one thing that you learned or that happened that just really stands out? I'm not asking you to pick your favorite one because I think that's really impossible to do. But is there
Yeah.
something that stands out that actually fundamentally affected you and your communication that you learned?
The importance of being concise. The importance of, so over 2,300 episodes, the skill that we've honed is how do we explain something, not really through explaining, right? It's through showing how it's done, essentially. Displaying the skill more it is really what I mean by that. And that's kind of the skill that I've learned, the importance of being concise. It's better to say less and kind of, especially if you're teaching from a teacher's perspective, let listeners and students fill in the gaps so that they can take on that active role in learning and kind of take that ownership and gain that confidence that we talked about at the top of the show. When you take part in your learning, you gain confidence, especially as a podcaster. We need to keep our listeners engaged. And so I think it's important to be concise when you speak in any context.
Concision is definitely important.
Yeah.
I'm just pausing there to show that I was concise, but you're absolutely right. And again, I'm very curious about who you will say for this question number 2. Who is a communicator that you admire and why?
Yeah, I have always admired Barack Obama's presentation
Mm-hmm.
style. Coming back to reflection and coming back to the importance of having a deeper meaning to your work. And I think you couldn't find a good speaker without having that. I think he's just genuine, right? I think he genuinely wants to help people. And I think that is the foundation of a good speaker, being present, being genuine, and having, like we said, that higher value. What is it that you're here for? What matters to you about what you're saying and to your audience? He's also he has the tactics and the techniques. He drives his point home. And in terms of his tone, he has a really nice blend of kind of academic and professional, intelligent, accomplished, respected, combined with kind of an everyday person sort of tone. And he strikes the balance incredibly well.
Many people have said that he is their speaker they admire the most. What the insight that you brought to this that I have not heard before, which I totally agree with, is that blended tone that you referred to, the ability to sound learned and at the same time to be connected. Yes. Final question. What are the first 3 ingredients that go into a successful communication recipe?
So I think self-awareness is the first thing. Self-awareness and also self-examination, being willing to sit down and reflect on, the conversation event that you just had or what you're going to have, understanding your tendencies. And this also encapsulates culture too, right? What are my cultural defaults? What are my default assumptions on how I should act communication-wise in this situation? They may be very different. So it's very important to be aware of what are the messages that you've gotten your whole life and do those fly in this moment. So self-awareness is number 1. I think being open to feedback. So honesty, being open to hearing feedback from someone else and giving feedback. This is how we get better in terms of conversation. And number 3 is just experience. As we said at the top of the show, the thing that a lot of our listeners are kind of wanting to work on is confidence. But I'm such a firm believer that confidence doesn't come from a mantra, like repeating a mantra to ourselves in our rooms, in our offices, staying inside. It comes from actual raw experience. It comes from failing. And so being willing to go out and just be a kind of a go-getter and just do the thing is important. So being an action taker.
I like that idea of action taking. And it doesn't surprise me at all as a listener of your podcast. It's very action oriented. Yes. Lindsay, I knew this would be very insightful. I know that all of our listeners can benefit, regardless of their language skills, to really think through what it means to be effective and how to focus, as you say, on connection, not perfection, and really allow yourself the opportunity to practice in lots of different ways. I appreciate your time and keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. Thank you so much.